Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg. Welcome to Book Circle Presents The Lion Knights. This time we continue our reading of The Lion Host. Gus and Doug are two regular guys from Chicago who were kidnapped by a cruel fairy and turned into lion men and pressed into service as her soldier slaves. Well, they've escaped that, and now they have met Captain Fletcher of the Dedicated Cavalry of Grand Normandy. You may have heard some of his stories before. And they've asked him, "What are we?" "What are we, sir?" Gus asked. Fletcher stared back at them. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He rose again, turned in place again, and wished he could pace. "It's bad news," said Doug. "I've seen it in his face ever since we told him about the hive mind." Enough of being the skittish horse. "I don't know if you'll think it bad or not," Fletcher said. He faced them directly and spoke quietly. "But I've never given anyone bigger news." He stood to attention and locked eyes with each of them in turn. "You are no longer mortals. You are fays." They stared back, mouths open. Then, "Wait, why?" Gus demanded. "You said we didn't look like anything you knew of." "I'm not going by how you look. I'm going by what's happened to you." "What do you mean?" "The hive mind," Doug said. Fletcher nodded. "We call it a troop. Fays can turn mortals into fays, and they do it by joining the mortals to a troop. Sometimes they simply have you live with the troop for a year or so, and it just happens. But you took an oath of service to her, accepted her hospitality, ate and drank and danced with her and her family. That gave her the opening to form a troop with you. Then she would have left the troop while you slept. Then she had her shapecaster transform you. But you were already fays." "But what does that mean?" asked Doug. "What is a fay?" "We're out of the troop now, right?" Gus interrupted. "I mean, the hive mind's over." "Doug, can we change back? If we're fays and not mortals, does that mean, Gus, we're not stuck, are we? Can we go home?" "The troop ended when she died. As far as I can see," said Fletcher, "you can go home." "But looking like this?" Gus stared down at his armored skin. "And those other people in the stories, the ones who vaporized or had to go back." "The ones who vanished were recruited as ghosts. They weren't fully embodied yet and just lost it in the shock. Probably didn't realize they were dead until then. The ones who went back had nowhere else to go. Centuries had passed. You've just missed 5 years." "But what is a fay?" Doug demanded. "A fay is an immortal shapeshifter," Fletcher answered. There was another pause. "No, wait," Gus objected. "The boss, de Gorodel, died. I went to her funeral. I saw the body." "She will recover. It may take years or centuries, depending on her individual degree and kind of magical power. But someday she will come walking out of that burial mound. They did bury her in a mound, didn't they?" They nodded, and Fletcher nodded back. "If they had cremated her and scattered her ashes, it would take much longer, but she would still come back. This way, at least, they know where she will appear and will be ready to meet her with the demand that she take a permanent oath of peace, if they have any sense." "So," said Doug softly, "seriously immortal." His gaze had gone somewhere deep inside. Fletcher smiled grimly. "Seriously." Now it was Gus's turn to look thoughtful. "When our guys died, JJ and Sandy and Gopal, and before them Raj and Terry, they buried them in mounds too. Did they know? Are our guys going to... Would we..." He stopped, and his gaze went inward too. Fletcher stared silently at the floor. He had seen people die. He had guided scores of men through transformations like his own. He had met ex-mortals, but he had never before told anyone they were immortal. They had asked him for guidance, but what could he possibly give here so far outside his own experience? Abruptly, Doug pushed the table aside, scrambled out of bed, and strode to the window. He gazed down over the town, his one hand on the window frame, breathing hard. Gus did not seem to notice. His gaze still inward, he said to Fletcher, "You said I could go home. How?" The gears turned again in Fletcher's mind. He could advise. "I will ask the captain of the Bethos to give you passage if you want. At the very least, I will leave you a passage map, and you can make your own way." "But the Dagorandor said luck wouldn't let us get home." "Something about luck does hide magic and its results from the Mond Minor, the ordinary world. We call it the Sundering. But I don't think the Dagorandor knew much about it. He lives far away from the Mond Minor, after all, and doesn't seem to have much interest. Your war lady clearly knew a lot more. All you have to do is keep out of public view or go disguised. That same twist of luck will bless your efforts." Gus brought his gaze outward again and looked at Fletcher doubtfully. "How could I disguise this?" He spread his arms and twitched his tail. Doug turned at the window, now listening. "Glamour," said Fletcher promptly. "You've heard of it?" Gus nodded. "When I go abroad, I wear some enchanted thing, a shirt or blanket, that makes me look like a horse or a mounted man. The Dagorandor wouldn't think of such things, because his kind can see right through them, but they work a treat on mortals. We sell such things at home." "But that's just tricks with light," said Gus. "An optical illusion can't really hide how big I am, or the tail and all. Not close up." He stood and spread his arms again. Fletcher nodded. "You could walk the streets, but you couldn't hide that from your families and friends. You would have to tell them at least some of the truth." "Some?" Fletcher considered briefly. "I was captured by an evil warlord who experimented on me." "That sounds really lame." "Not if you're standing there 7 feet tall. Or take off the glamour and tell them the whole story. In either case, warn them of the bad luck if they try to make it public. Anyway, glamour is just the simplest, quickest fix," Fletcher went on. "Shape-shifting," said Doug, but he sounded preoccupied. "You're saying we can become shapeshifters?" "You already are," said Fletcher, regrowing arms and tails. "It's built in. You just need to learn to control it. From what I've heard, it should be relatively easy to return to your original forms." "Good," said Gus, but his gaze had returned inward, and he sounded preoccupied too. There was silence for some seconds. Then Doug came and stood behind Gus, put hand on shoulder, and said, "We have a lot to do." His voice was hushed. "We do?" Gus sounded distant. "We need to tell the rest of the guys back in Huspawn. We need to get word to Venkat and Hank back in Buried Torgon. We need to do something about our dead, our buried. We need to pick up some of these glamours and get home as quick as we can." Gus nodded. "And then?" he asked after a short silence. Doug stood silent too. Then, "I don't know." The silence returned. Fletcher let them have it. Living alongside Faze, he had wondered often enough how he would face immortality. The wondering had come out many different ways. No telling which perspective on ever after they were gazing down. Finally, "It'll never get any better," Gus said. "No, man," Doug denied, but he sounded unsure. "We can go back. We can learn to change back. In fact, yeah, I know. Fletcher thought he heard a dam cracking. "That'll be some better, but you and me, we were going to see the world. We've seen, what, 6 or 7 now. We wanted to see wonders. We did, and they were terrible. We wanted, oh God, Doug, all those nights under those sideways stars, all those days under that tiny sun, we wanted out. Each of us could feel all the others wanting out. And now we're just wandering around in weirdness, and we'll always be part of the weirdness, never get out, no matter where we go or what shapes we take. We can't go home. Sure we can. Oh, we can go back to Chicago, but either we hide what happened, what we turned into, and lie, or we don't, and bring down all this weirdness on our families. Great choice. Damn her. Damn her. Only that won't ever happen, will it? She'll just walk out of her grave someday and go on her merry way. She'll never go to hell, and we can never go to heaven. He waved at Fletcher's map. The circles of the world. We're bound forever to the circles of the world, like the Eldar. Forever. He hung his head and wept. It was silent weeping, the kind made when no help can come. Doug's hand still rested on Gus's shoulder. He turned the grip into a one-armed hug, but hung his own head and stayed silent. Fletcher racked his brain for what to say. He'd seen people weeping because the Fays would not take them, left them to wither in their mortality. It was a commoner response. He thought Gus's reaction the wiser, but it was less than no help to tell Gus that. "Do you know gospel music?" Doug asked, out of nowhere as far as Fletcher was concerned. His voice was flatly calm. "I've heard of it, that's all. Created by the slaves in America and their children. It looks forward to heaven a lot." Fletcher saw Gus's closer ear twitch, listening. "I understand it so much better now. Gus and I, we were both looking for something more, something beyond. Oh man, did we get smacked down for that. While we were enslaved in the troop, we by and large gave up thinking we could get home. All of us, hive mind. There was a sliver of desperate hope in some of us, Gus, but we talked and thought a lot about escape, of course. But you had that chain on our minds. The likeliest escape seemed to be death. So we thought about heaven a lot, or our next life, or nirvana. Out, better, beyond. The differences didn't seem very important. Then we were freed, but only from her. Gus and I won't speak for the others, here we had all the something beyond anyone could want. And yeah, it would be nice to go home, but when you've given up on that, you start to see that this world, any of these worlds, aren't enough. They aren't the beyond you want. Not really. Suppose we did live decades of glorious adventure, lots of fun, but it adds up to what? Sir, Gus talked about heaven a lot lately. Listen. Fletcher thought, you were just two young men from Chicago wanting to knock around the world, never knowing you had a hunger for transcendence until you started starving for it. Doug met Fletcher's eyes. Is that what you're really telling us, Captain? That we're stuck here while glaciers roll and the moon falls and the stars die and the sky shreds and we're still stuck here? That we'll never reach a worthwhile beyond? Fletcher had had time to rally. No, I'm not. Lads, listen. I am sure that neither death nor life nor angels nor any other creature can separate us from the love of God in Christ. Paul, Romans. If life and death and angels can't do it, a jumped-up elf certainly can't. Lads, listen. On the ship or on foot, every Sunday, our expedition stops for Mass if at all practical. And I stand there making the responses in my pagan form, and you know who's perched on my back or my shoulders like as not to get a better view? common fays. We've a dozen or so on this expedition, and they all took baptism as well as the mark, and some of them in St. Alice's day, back in the 12th century. And while nations rose and fell and the church herself reeled and splintered, they've been patiently waiting for kingdom come. Now, they have a natural advantage. Born fays, natural fays, aren't bothered by the idea of infinite time. They're made for ever after. They don't get dizzy looking ahead or behind, just each day as it comes and plan as you need to. But you, us, life everlasting, yes, but even that isn't enough, and we know it. That's why you're terrified of the idea of ever after. We need more. And you'll get it. You'll get it. We're all waiting for kingdom come under one name or another, fey or mortal alike, waiting for it alive or dead. We were already immortal souls, you know. I will outlast Sagittarius just as you will outlast Leo. We will all remember the galaxies as an old tale. Now, in the meantime, and I grant there may be a lot of meantime, each day as it comes and plan as you need to is a pretty good strategy. Doug's got a good plan already laid out, I think. That will keep you busy for a while, give you time to think. But in general, he folded his arms and deployed the patient, probing gaze he had used on so many students. What do you think is the best thing you can do while you wait for kingdom come? Gus blinked the human tears out of his feline eyes and essayed a smile. Be good fairies? Doug burst into laughter and clapped his friend on the back. Fletcher relaxed, though he did not quite see the joke. We'll buy up teeth, Doug shouted. We'll be godfathers. We'll hunt monsters out from under beds, said Gus. Fletcher smiled. And my offer still stands, he continued. I will ask the captain of the Bethos if she can give you passage back to Grand Normandy, including your battle brothers in Husband. 20 is a lot to take on, but Captain Coudray isn't immune to compassion, and there's a definite glory in befriending a band of 20 elven knights. Elven knight, exclaimed Gus. That's a role I can get behind. Beats orcs, seconded Doug. The three of them made plans, not forever after, but for the next few days. How long would it take to get to Husband and back? How much time would the rest of the Rauerhoth need to wind up their affairs if they chose to come? What had been their route from Bariad Torgon to Varsus? They refined what to say to their families back in Chicago, something along the lines of, we were captured by an evil warlord who experimented on us, then we escaped and got mixed up in undercover work, so we can't tell you much about it. By the end, they had arranged for Gus and Doug to come down to the docks tomorrow, there to meet Fletcher and Captain Coudray, to hear her judgment, and to debrief to her, her navigator, and other expeditionary scholars. Fletcher also wanted them to meet other folk who could best address their situation, his own cavalrymen, the Fey crew of the Bethos, and the Mer crew. Mer crew? You'll see. The two young men laughed a lot, even at tiny jokes or at nothing. Fletcher laughed with them and recognized their merriment as relief. Years of confusion were over. There was a prospect of home. There had been bad news, but it had been faced and was mixed with good. As Fletcher left, he heard Doug say, next time we get tangled up in my mythology and get turned into magic foxes, and Gus's returning laughter. Gus watched out the window, following Fletcher's tall form down the hill. Elven knights. Holy crow. I am an elven knight, he said to himself for the first time, and remembered the moment ever after. Next time, we'll continue with the adventures of the Lion Knights and see where they go next.